one of the things you mentioned was mindfulness, and I've always been interested in mindfulness and how it works and the benefits, and actually what happens in the brain when we do meditate or when we practice mindfulness. So what does actually happen in our brains when we practice mindfulness, and does it really make us happier?
Yeah. So, first of all, probably we need to define mindfulness. So, there are different definitions of mindfulness. Mindfulness has been around for 2,500 years. And only recently in the West, like since the late 70s or 80s, did Westerners look at mindfulness initially as an intervention for chronic pain, and then later on it got absorbed by the non-clinical population, and now a lot of people talk about mindfulness. So definition I like of mindfulness is more Eastern in definition, which is mindfulness is continuous awareness of the present experience and being very accepting and calm about it. So you're actually quite conscious, you're quite aware of what's going on, not confused by a lot of the stories that we have, not contaminated too much by a lot of our worries, but just being present, being calm, and being at peace. So that's the definition of mindfulness that I like. So when people practice mindfulness meditation regularly, and when I say regularly, ideally every day, and not just doing formal meditation where you just do mindfulness for X number of minutes, but trying to live mindfully throughout the day, like while you're driving, while you're with your patients, while you're playing sports, so you can have that mindful awareness of your activity. So when people are more mindful, or actually let's talk about studies, what studies have shown is that when people have done mindfulness training programs like 8-week MBSR courses, they've looked at different changes. There are a few things that have been demonstrated. So there definitely are brain changes. So they've found increase in the size of the hippocampus and the temporoparietal junction. And the hippocampus is partially responsible for emotional regulation. Temporoparietal junction is involved in connection, empathy, compassion. And then another interesting change, which makes sense, is that the amygdala, which is our threat center, decreases in size. So those are neuroimaging findings, yeah. But for me, more interesting, neuroscience research on mindfulness is that our parasympathetic nervous system actually gets more engaged. So the parasympathetic system, which is important for feeling calm, feeling rested, or feeling at peace, actually gets engaged more. So they've done all sorts of work on this. So in summary, I think the research on mindfulness shows that it definitely can be very helpful, but it should not be seen as a panacea. It doesn't cure everything.
Yeah.
In fact, mindfulness was not developed to treat depression or anxiety. So mindfulness was developed or taught by the Buddha 2,500 years ago, in addition to other things. So it was not taught mainly as just mindfulness. So he talked about mindfulness, but he talked a lot about compassion. He talked a lot about regulating our emotions, a lot of self-reflection. So he taught these different approaches for us to be happy. So one of the things I want to mention about mindfulness again and again is that in the West, we've taken it out of context. We now talk about mindfulness as a separate entity, as a skill, or as a technique, whereas originally it was not taught as a separate technique, but it's actually in combination with other forms of mind training and living ethically.